I feel like vocals get looked at in a very different way from literally any other type of instrument, in that people don't really see it as a skill so much as just like a natural talent you either have or you don't. And because of that, when it comes to actually recording vocals and working with vocalists, people have a tendency to they quite often are going to treat it like some unknowable force that they're never going to be able to fully understand, and I think that sometimes that can do a disservice to the vocalists they're working with. Because if you view someone else's singing as something that you could never really understand the mechanics of, and that it's just some innate thing that they can do and you just need to get them in the right mood and the magical moment, and that's what's going to create the perfect vocal take, then obviously you're not going to be able to help and coach that vocalist through getting a good vocal take. Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, then welcome to the chaos. I do all things music related on here, from audio engineering style content to production and songwriting challenges to just talking about music and musician life. Today's video is down the production sort of vein of things and audio engineering. Specifically, we're going to look at recording vocals. This is sort of going to be a tips video, I guess, but more than it be like a specific tips video, I want to like demystify the process of tracking vocals. Not the actual technical side of it, like the how to record and what microphone to choose and stuff. More about the process that goes on in the booth and the process that goes on between the engineer working on recording something and the vocalist in the session. Now, obviously, if you are self-recording and self-producing like I do, they are the same person. You are both the engineer and the person actually giving the performance in the booth. And what I talk about in this video will apply to you as well somewhat, but more I want to like demystify vocals for people who are not vocalists and don't really know much about the technical side of singing, but who do already work as a producer, as an audio engineer, or are looking to get into that. So this is going to be some things I think that producers and audio engineers should know about the actual mechanics of singing and things that might help the vocalist that you're working with. It is so important to get the performance of the vocal right in that initial tracking phase. And yeah, you can rescue a terrible take like that. You can fix things in timing, you can fix things in pitch, but it is always the case that getting things right in the performance is pretty much always going to sound better than having to fix them in the mix, because when you start shifting things around in terms of timing with vocals in particular, it can start sounding quite funny very quickly. And what a good initial take looks like is not necessarily going to look like what that vocalist might do live. A live vocal is very different from a recorded vocal. That live performance, it's a one-off event, and so people are not expecting perfection, and they're not going to notice a lack of perfection in a way that when you have a recorded version, when things are a little bit out of time here and there or a little bit out of tune, people are going to notice it more. When you sing live, when you're trying to project your voice like that, or you're just trying to sing in a healthy way as well, like the most important thing when you're singing live more than anything else is that you are singing healthily, because if you're doing multiple gigs night after night after night, you need to be singing that song in a way that is good for your voice. Whereas in the studio, you can get away with doing things that are maybe not the healthiest way to do something, but are not like outright damaging to your vocals. Things that are more challenging to do in a way that if you were to do that every night live for a week, you would damage your vocal cords, but like just doing it once in the vocal booth is not a big deal. Technique that is more prioritizing style over an ability to reproduce it over and over and over and over and over. Anyway, so I just wanted to list off a few things that I think are important to bear in mind when you are recording vocals, and things that producers and audio engineers might want to know that even a lot of vocalists themselves don't really know some of these things. Okay, number one, tension is the death of good singing. Not just because anytime you are tense when you are singing, you are almost definitely going to strain. But a lot of what people actually have like in their mind of what you should do to get a good vocal performance is actually kind of the opposite of what I would recommend doing, especially when it comes to recording, right? Because the second you walk into a vocal booth and you know that you're doing a recording of your voice, all this tension happens. So one of the most important things for the person working with a vocalist a lot of the time is gonna be helping them to not tense up. And this is going to look like a variety of things. Some of it is going to be the physical side, which we'll come back to in a second, but a large amount of it is going to be the emotional side. Encourage that vocalist to not fixate on the things they got wrong in previous takes. Figure out how they're going to fix things they got wrong in previous takes, so they're not just doing take after take after take, getting tenser and tenser and more annoyed about the fact that they're messing up, and then because they're annoyed about it, they get tenser and they mess up more. But also make them feel comfortable to do the things that vocalists actually need to do to relieve tension. The number of vocalists I know who don't warm up, and the number one reason they give for not warming up, both in a recording setting and a live setting, is because they feel embarrassed doing it. This might mean giving the vocalist some privacy. Like, I've had this when recording in studios, the offer before you start doing any takes of, do you want to just go into this other room that we have and do some quick vocal warm-ups? If they don't actually even know how to warm up their vocal, which can be a thing for some vocalists, there are some really great beginner warm-ups on things like YouTube and stuff. But just generally encouraging an atmosphere as well where silly stuff is happening in general, where the people in the studio are taking it seriously because they want to get stuff done, but they're not taking it so seriously the people don't feel like they can do embarrassing things in there. Having a good atmosphere in your studio is really important for a vocalist. Otherwise, they're going to give you a terrible performance. Obviously, if they're really reluctant to do so, there's not much you can do about that. At that point, it's their fault if they get a bad take. But as sort of a 1B to this one, tension relates to how the body is held massively. The longer you're standing in any sort of position, really focusing on doing the vocal thing, and the more they're obsessed with like good posture, shoulders back, chin in, like this is actually a really bad posture for singing. I am so tense like that right now. Even just talking doesn't feel good in that posture. You want a more relaxed posture. Yeah, you don't want to be slouched forward. But honestly, this is healthier, this position I'm in right now. I am healthier singing from this position than I am this position. Really, you want your vocalist as floppy as possible. You want to make sure that that microphone is at a good height for them so that it doesn't encourage tension. I've heard a lot of people have had terrible advice that when they sing live, they should set their mic so it's sort of at their nose so that they never slouch into it, so they always got good posture when they sing. I can't even hold that whilst talking too long because it creates so much tension in your throat that it starts to hurt. And if it's hurting, it's bad. It is actually better that a microphone be too low, really, than be too high, because you can always just spread your legs a little bit wider or bend your knees a bit more. You don't want it too low, obviously, but you really don't want to say it too high. And a much better way to engage your core rather than focusing on what's going on up here is actually I like to tell people to bend their knees a little bit, because I know a lot of people also then recommend to tense like the bottom part of your body, curling your toes and things like that. They can help. But really, anytime you're trying to create tension somewhere else to relieve tension up here, you're probably going to end up tensing up here still anyway because you're just so focused on tensing something. And what you actually more want to do is you want to get used to what that feeling is like when you could rock back and forward from foot to foot really easily and not wobble, not fall down. And you do want to encourage them between takes. If you notice that they've been getting quite a few not good takes, encourage them to take a moment and to literally, I'm going to demonstrate this, you want them to just bend over and completely flop. Literally just reach down to their toes. Let yourself be floppy. And it's actually one of the best ways to really engage the correct parts of your voice for your belt. The other thing can be facial tension as well. And the best one for that is like if they're struggling to get like a run or something right, doing it on a can really help as well. Anyway, the point basically there was those are a couple of things that can help reduce tension. So there are pieces of advice that you can pass on to the vocalists you're working with if they're really struggling with being too tense to get the part out. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about, the importance of vowels. Vowels. We are obsessed with vowels in the singing community, with good reason. Vowels are like one of the keys to accessing different registers and accessing them well. So a nice is really good for accessing your head voice and that falsetto sound. As a general rule, really open vowels are a lot easier to sing on. But if you're trying to get more of that musical theatre sound, you'll notice that there's a lot of those nasal sounding vowels and those bright front vowels. And it's because quite often they're doing a mixed belt, and it's really easy to use those to access that kind of technique better. But obviously, the other thing is that different vowels are going to create a different sound to the vocal that is really important when it comes to recording, because it's going to affect the clarity and it's also going to affect the overall feel. This is treating vocals as an instrument and not just as lyrics. When you come and play violin, you can pluck it or you can bow it. And I view certain vowel sounds as being similar to that. Picking your vowel sounds is very similar to picking how hard you bow, because different ones are going to give a very different feel. And that leads me on to the third thing I wanted to talk about, which is vocal placement. There are various different registers that a singer can sing in, and you'll hear people talk about things like a belt versus a mixed belt, versus a falsetto versus a general head voice. You can only access certain parts of your range up in your head voice, and you can only access certain parts of your range down in your chest voice. Chest voice is for lower notes, head voice is for higher notes, so on and so forth. But then within that, you have different ways of using both your chest and your head voice, and you can do this thing that people call mixing. These are all different placements that are going to sound different. When it comes to singing live, it's important to understand different placements of the voice for understanding which one you should use to sing certain notes in certain songs, because they are just the ones that you are better at accessing, or it's just the healthiest way for you to sing that note. Like understanding when you should mix a note and when you should just outright chest belt it, or when you should do it in head voice. But in the vocal booth, it's really important to understand all of these so that you can make more choices about your placement based on how they sound. But for a producer or an audio engineer recording a vocalist, I think it's important that you at least know some of these words and have a bit of an idea of what a belted chest voice sounds like versus somewhat what a mixed voice might sound like and what a falsetto sounds like, so that you can talk to and communicate with the vocalist about the choices they're making of their placement. Hey, you're doing that bit in falsetto, aren't you? I think it would actually sound better, a little bit more powerful, so could we give it more of a head voice sort of resonance? Anyway, I'm not saying you have to become like an expert in different vocal registers and being able to identify them perfectly in every single vocalist you work with, but it'd be a good idea to familiarize yourself with the registers and placement and how these things actually interact with the way a vocal sounds and why people choose different registers for different parts. Okay, the fourth thing I want to talk about, enunciation. And this isn't just like a preference thing of like, you know, those vocalists that pronounce things in a really funny way. What do they call it? Singing in cursive, they call it. It's such a silly way to refer to it, but it also does kind of describe what they're doing. But when it comes to recording, more so than live, like when people are just vibing in the moment live, they don't really need to know and hear all the words. But in a recording, I think something that can often ruin a vocal recording, especially if it's in a genre where the lyrics are really important, is if you really can't tell what someone is saying. But also choosing to enunciate certain parts more is, again, gonna be a choice you make about how you want that vocal to sound. Because something that a vocalist might not know, but that you know as a producer, those plosive sounds and those sibilants, we can mellow them out with EQ, with de-essers, things like this, with actually just going in and finding that individual t sound and just knocking the gain down a little bit on it. You can literally do things like that so easily, and that is a much better thing to have to try to fix in the mix than if you're trying to fix the fact that there was no T there in the first place. You really can't hear it, you can't tell what that word is, and now we're really unclear on this lyric and we don't like that. It's sometimes better to get them to over-enunciate it. This is one of the things that actually I learned whilst in the studio working on something with another audio engineer and producer. It was a piece of advice that he'd gotten from a much more experienced vocal producer in the industry, that getting a few takes where you get the vocalist to completely over-enunciate things in a way that they never normally would is often a good thing to have, because there are going to be times when you really want to hear that word clearly, and it's better to have a nice over-enunciated take than to not have that and have just nothing but wishy-washy takes. Also, they do genuinely tend to sound better. It makes a vocal that is just more satisfying to the ears. And that kind of leads me on to the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is when actually tracking the vocals, something that has helped me to learn more about how to get good vocal takes and what a good vocal take actually sounds like, is to think about what can and cannot be fixed in the mix. I mean, ideally, you get things right in the booth. Like, you want things relatively in tune, relatively in time, But it is always important to think about what things you can fix in the mix, what things you can change in the mix, what things that once it's mixed. So things I would say ideally that you want to get right are, if you're doing a run, every note in that run does not need to be perfectly on pitch. In fact, every note in that run is almost definitely not going to be perfectly on pitch. If you hit a run and you hit the individual notes as individual notes, it does not matter if they are exactly the right note or if they're exactly on pitch. If they're a little bit flat, a little bit sharp, that can be fixed. What cannot really be fixed is if you don't really hit individual notes in that run and someone has to come in and cut up your vocal and then move it around, you will hear that. So it's more important when you're doing a run that you get nice distinction between those notes. Again, another thing I would say that's far more important than tuning is timing and rhythm when it comes to vocals. When you're comping an acoustic guitar and it's strummed the whole way through, if one strum is in time and the next strum is not, but the strum after it is, you can take that strum that isn't in time, nudge it back into time, and then you extend out that bit where they ring out until you got it so that they're matching up nicely enough that then when you put a little fade in there, you don't notice it, especially once it's then in the track. But for one thing, that's something that's much lower down in the track a lot of the time. It's not up front like a vocal is. And unlike a vocal, an acoustic guitar strum, it sounds pretty much the same throughout. When it's ringing out, like, the waveform is doing different things at different points, and as long as you're matching up that bit of the waveform quite well where it's then meeting again, so that you're not getting it fighting back against each other, it sounds fine with a fade. That doesn't really apply to bits of vocal stuff, because, like, whatever you, like, if you try and stretch out someone holding a note, you pretty much always notice that fade in the middle. If it's like a one word you've nudged back into time and you're stretching out like a consonant or something, it starts to sound weird. It starts to sound like there's a weird gap and a pause, or something was sung a bit too fast, because if you got the timing wrong, you probably didn't get the length of the note quite right either, and everything just is going to start to sound off when you start trying to nudge in time. So it's really important, I would say, that vocals are in time. And that kind of comes back to that vocal placement again. If a placement is going to sound better, but they're struggling to get that perfectly in tune, then that's not how they sing it when they sing it live, because they'll be singing it flat every time they sing it live. But if it's a little bit flat in the booth, you can fix that. But you can't manufacture that tone after the fact. So yeah, communicate to your vocalist what you can and cannot fix. And the final thing I want to then talk about, your vocalist might not always be right about where they want to be dropped in and how they want to be dropped in, and you have to be a bit brave sometimes and maybe bully them into doing things in a way that they might not feel comfortable with, but might actually be better for them in the long run in terms of getting the take. A lot of us really like the idea that we need a nice big long run up. Give me 2 bars of nothing but click or like intro or whatever. And a lot of the time that is going to be good. Like if you are doing an entire verse or an entire chorus section, a nice 2-bar run up to give them time to breathe in and out and then in again before they start the take. There's this idea that like taking a break after every single take is actually the best thing to do, but something that I do when I'm in the booth by myself, and not just because it's more convenient to do this, is I just loop the section I want to do and I let the record feature just keep doing a new recording over and over and over again, and I keep doing the same bit over and over and over again without a pause and a break between. And this was something I actually asked when I was in the booth once in the studio. I said, hey, can you actually just keep sending me back in without breaking and asking me? Like, just do like 3 or 4 in a row where you just keep sending me back in. And the one we did in the middle of that was a really good take because of it. Taking that pause and getting yourself out of the moment, like you've just gone into the flow, and then it breaks. We stop. I switch from my singing register to my speaking register to talk to you. And then you throw me back in again. That's not necessarily the best thing for a vocalist. Like, getting yourself into that singing flow is a really good thing for getting a take really good. And once you're in that flow, interrupting it might actually be a worse thing. So maybe communicate this with the vocalist before. It's like, do you want me to pause between each take, communicate things to me, take a little break, grab some water, or do you want me to like put you quite close to where it comes in, maybe just give you a bar beforehand and just loop it and have you keep going in for like 3 or 4 takes and then see if we're happy with something. Similarly, if there is a particular section that you are really trying to hone in on, like say you've got a run you're trying to hit, a lot of the time isolating that one bit that as much as you can that is really tricky is going to be a good idea. So sometimes you might not be able to isolate it from the line it's in, because it might be that everything's flowing together so well it's going to be really hard to just record that run. Sometimes you can literally just record that one run. Going in and doing concentrated on that works so much better than just doing that verse over and over again and telling them to only concentrate on that bit, because most of us vocalists, we are also perfectionists, and as much as we know that we got the first half of this verse right every single take, right, and we know that the only thing we should concentrate in this take is that one run, when we hit a flat note or something a bit off in that first bit, it's gonna throw us and be like, I should have hit that, oh wait, I also now didn't hit this run. So sometimes it's better to isolate it so that they don't have to think about all those other bits of the verse that you already got right. Another good thing for it is to not actually give them like a count in for it. So quite often, if I'm trying to just do one bit and I know I've got 2 bars and then I come in for my one bit that I'm doing, I'm so focused on like counting when I come in that I end up like with this really robotic, horrible sounding vocal, because and still tense and still not sounding good, because I'm just too focused on counting, and I shouldn't be counting when I want to sing, because it's more of a flow than it is a rhythm. And one of the things I like to do for myself, but I'm going to use an example here. There was a bit in this song where I did it. I'm going to see if I can try and find the bit just by looking. Here it is. So it was this bit here. Oh, sorry. And similarly, it's again around, what, here? Maybe I should just... But it's that just. It's a really subtle little run. I find those the hardest to get right. I would rather have a big run that goes all over the place than a little just, which is ridiculous because I put them in my songs a lot, but I find them really hard to execute because the difference between the notes is so subtle, it's so small, and it's so easy for them to end up so blended together they just don't sound like a run anymore. So you can see I have put myself in just for that bit, and the way I actually did it, because you can see it better on these here. See how all of these start in a slightly different place? That's because the way I did it had my little controller in the booth, and I had my track ready. So I'm just going to do this with a different track so I don't end up recording over this. I put it somewhere a little bit beforehand, like a line or so before, and I just hit the play button. Maybe I should just live. That's how I did it, like that. And you can do that even more easily if you are not the vocalist in the booth. Like, that's hard to do as the vocalist in the booth, cueing yourself in like that. Because, especially if you have Logic, I don't know if other DAWs work like this. When you just literally, if you are recording on a track, even if it's record enabled, if you hit play, it plays back what you've recorded already on that track. And then it's only when you hit record that it stops playing back and it starts recording. So you can literally hit that record at any moment, but you can play them the vocal that they were singing beforehand. So they don't need to think about where they're coming in, where they are in the song, what bit this is, try and figure out what vocal they're actually about to come in on, because they can hear it in their own vocal line. And that is one of the best ways. The more you can take away someone having to figure out where they are in the song to get their part right. And it's very different when you can actually see the project in front of you, obviously. But if you're alone in the vocal booth and all you've got for the context is what you can hear in the song, and say like the chords are pretty samey in different places, and you can't necessarily figure out from the instrumental where you're actually coming in, having that vocal line there, and then just the record once you need to actually record the bit, works a lot better. And a lot of people might think that they won't like this, like they don't like getting thrown in too close to where they actually need to start singing. But actually sometimes, if you just keep getting thrown in relatively close to where you want to sing, and your only preparation is just hearing the line before, rather than like building up to it from miles away, that will probably be better. It gives you less time to do this. It keeps you in that zone that I just sung this part. I know how it goes. I know where I'm placing it. This time I'm just going to do a better job of it. It keeps you in that zone. Working faster actually works better with vocalists a lot of the time. The more time you give them to breathe, the more time you are also giving them to do this. And a lot of vocalists might think that they hate it at first, but trust me, if you think you hate this, really try it when you're recording yourself from now on. Give yourself less of a run-up. Give yourself less time to count and more time to just vibe and go with it, because it does tend to work a lot better. I've been recording myself singing for quite a while now, and I've been in sessions in a couple of different studios, and I have watched so much YouTube and stuff of people doing these recording sessions, and something I have noticed both for me and other vocalists that I have watched people working with is that actually it often is better to just not give yourself as much of a run-up and to just keep staying in that zone. Those are just my thoughts, and obviously some of this is just like my opinion, but I hope that that's given some people some things to bear in mind, and I hope that if you are a vocalist trying to produce your own vocals yourself and you really struggle with getting takes you're happy with in the booth, maybe try things I've talked about in this video and see if that actually helps you to get better initial takes. We should just be fixing little bits here and there in the mix. We should get those really good first takes. Okay, that is all. I have rambled for long enough, I think. I would love to hear other people's opinions and any other pieces of advice that you've picked up over the years, or other things that you think are important to bear in mind when recording vocals. And also, if this like applies to other instruments, like, am I going to get a bunch of guitarists in the comments now like, actually, you know what, I really don't like having too much of a run up and having to count in too much. Like, just throw me in to go straight in with the part without having to count too much. Works way better for me. If you enjoyed this video, then you might enjoy my content on this channel in general, in which case you might want to hit that subscribe button. I know that is a big decision to make, so don't feel like you have to make it without watching a couple of other videos first to decide if you really want to be here. There'll be something recommended on the end screen for you. If you want to follow me on my social medias, they are linked in the description below. And there is also a link down there to my Buy Me a Coffee where you can join my membership, and if you do so, you get things like outtakes videos. There'll be a funny one from today's, I guarantee you that. Or you can just send me a one-off little tip if you just wanted to say, nice video, mate. Okay, that is everything. I shall love you guys and leave you, and see you next week with another fun music-related video of some sort. Bye, guys.
Let's take another